I'm a graduate of the Master Gardener program through CSU, the Jefferson County Extension, which taught me a lot, but mostly that government shouldn't be in charge of teaching people how to garden. I've done a lot of other things, lots of varied interests, and I like to wear a lot of denim all at once. I want to plug Josh's fantastic piece, Food, Nutrition, and Government Policy in America. This goes over everything that I will not, or that I will just gloss over in my presentation tonight. So please do go to the FEE website, get this, read it. It's fascinating, interesting read. Awesome job, Josh. Thank you.
Title again? Plagiarized.
Food, Nutrition, and Government Policy in America by Josh Souter. S-O-U-T-E-R. So, property rights, I want to define before I get going. Property rights definition to me is the ability to use and dispose of your property, whether that be land, stuff, or your person, as you see fit, as long as that use does not harm anyone else and does not cause anyone else to have a loss of their property rights. As this pertains to modern agriculture, there are a lot of conflicts that have kind of been set up, have definitely been set up by government interference in the market for bringing food to market. Beginning back in Abraham Lincoln's administration, there were acts, the first one was the Morrill Act, that put restrictions on exactly what could be done as far as agricultural businesses go. They set up a lot of indirect welfare, I'll call it. It got to be direct welfare later. Land grants, colleges, ag research for insect, plant soil diseases. The Smith-Lever Act of 1914 introduced agricultural specific education that the government paid for. Ooh, I'm hitting those really hard. I'll stop that.
I gotta get a pop filter.
The Federal Farm Loan Act of 1916 created land banks, which quickly went bankrupt. So that's all before FDR. A lot of people just think that all of the farm subsidies began, with FDR's administration. They definitely shifted when FDR came into office. It became more of a central planning focus with the Agricultural Marketing Board Act, actually doing advertising for different crops. $500 million was spent trying to raise commodity prices by stockpiling goods. So the government would basically buy all of your stuff and then keep it and let it rot and pay you money for it. The New Deal, of course, brought more direct subsidies. Insurance was a big one. Profit guarantees, if you can believe that. Price control guarantees. They appealed to conservationists with a lot of these acts so that they could bring environmentalists on board if they would provide easements or protected lands in a lot of these different subsidy acts. This, in general, Josh goes into all of this in a lot more detail in his article, so please read that. This set up essentially a cronyist, favor for favor situation for any type of agriculture in the United States. I'm concentrating on agriculture versus ranching and dairy, which is a whole another 65 presentations. This interferes, the cronyism, and setting it up so that only the big players that have something to provide to the controllers of the government sets it up so that the little guy pretty much has no chance of being as successful as the conglomerates do, which interferes with individual property rights. If the government says, hey, you can't plant wheat on your property, because the wheat prices need to be controlled, and we have determined at the highest level that there's enough. You can't grow it. In fact, even if you grow it and keep it for yourself, you can't do that because the fact that you're not buying wheat from someone else is affecting the market price. That's a perfect example, and the Supreme Court supported it. Josh goes into that in his article. That's the type of thing that we're dealing with. There have been attempts at reforms. 1996, there was a bill passed that really got a lot of this stuff out of the process of agricultural, but subsequent tag-ons and bills just gutted the whole reform. So how does this manifest itself in property rights of everyday small farmers, micro farmers, even some large farmers? How does that manifest itself, the government interference? Let me tell you. I'm going to give 3 examples. The first is about creeping bent grass. In Oregon and in Idaho, there was an experiment for a genetically engineered grass called bent grass, and it was developed by Scots with, I think Monsanto was backing part of the development too. For golf courses, the creeping bent grass can be cut to just an amazingly short trim and is perfect for golf courses. The problem is, when a weed gets into the bent grass, getting it out makes it not pretty anymore and creates a divot, and I don't golf, and that's probably bad.
You should golf.
I should golf. That is, exactly. So Scott was trying to get into, a better product for this particular market, which is huge. So the government approved a test in Oregon where Scots proceeded to plant this genetically engineered bent grass out in an open field to see how it propagated, to see how it did a whole bunch of tests. The casual observer knows that grass, when it goes to seed, spreads far and wide. Part of their experiment was seeing how quickly it went to seed, and apparently it was pretty quick. The seed escaped the test area and has invaded and is still in most of the waterways in Idaho and Oregon around the section where this was tested. Scott's was approached, by farmers who discovered this the hard way. When harvesting their alfalfa, when harvesting their wheat, before export, especially to Asian countries that don't allow genetically engineered products, it's tested for any genetically engineered products. It tested positive. Surprise, you have bent grass in your fields. So they couldn't export their products. They lost a huge amount of money. They were banned from exports by these countries for a minimum of 3 years to try and solve the problem. Scott's was not held accountable. This happened in 2003, the bent grass problem. Just last year in 2016, Scott's was fined $500,000 by the government, which will hurt them deeply, and was taxed with helping, not performing, but helping train the farmers and other people affected on how to mitigate it. Just trained. That's it. The government gave them a pass. The government approves it. The company that has approval from the government completely interferes with business and livelihood of people, and there are absolutely no consequences. I mean, $500,000 is a drop in the bucket. This bent grass has contaminated waterways, and in fact the U.S. Wildlife Service has formed a committee to try and get more help because this grass is choking out native grasses in waterways. It's interfering with fish doing their thing. It's awful. That's one government example. Property rights obviously being affected. Another recent one that has really come to light in the last few months is dicamba overspray, dicamba drift. Dicamba is an herbicide, very much like glyphosate, works on a different molecular level. Well, you've heard most likely of Roundup Ready crops, soybeans, cotton, things like that, corn. Roundup Ready crops, you can spray the whole crop, the weeds die, but the crop doesn't. Well, the weeds got smart because nature, and they have developed a resistance to Roundup, glyphosate. That means a new crop needs to be developed to resist or to be ready for the next herbicide, in this case dicamba. The seeds were developed, genetically engineered seeds from Monsanto, developed, approved by the government, and released in 2015, available for crop planting in 2015. They're dicamba ready. The problem was the dicamba wasn't ready for the seeds. A new formulation was required to be used with these seeds of dicamba so that it wouldn't drift when applied. The government didn't approve that part. So Monsanto put the seeds out to be planted, and predictably, what did the farmers do? They used an old, very driftable formulation of dicamba. This drifted to neighbor farms, effectively destroying their crops. Not just their crops, but all of the vegetation. Peach orchard in Missouri, largest peach orchard in Missouri, 1/3 of the orchard has been destroyed by dicamba drift. I'll get you in just a minute. So again, what do? You appeal to the government who approved all of this stuff? That's not really going to work. The farmers have appealed to their state governments and local boards to try and get some type of relief. Those different entities, the University of Arkansas, part of their research center, asked for all of the documentation that was provided to the EPA during the approval process for dicamba, and they were told they could not have it because it contained proprietary information. They're not required to do any type of outside testing when they apply for a permit to use this stuff. So the company that creates it, in this case BASF, they just do all of the research themselves, put it in, and the government approves it. The Trump administration took a while to approve it. The Obama administration thought, no, didn't want to do that. As soon as the Trump administration came in, the new formulation of dicamba was approved, and guess what? It still drifts. It still drifts. There was actually a murder in Arkansas over this. A farmer whose crops were seriously affected, effectively destroyed by dicamba drift from his neighbor, went to talk to his neighbor and say, hey, how are you going to pay for this? What are you going to do? And the other guy shot him.
Oh, wow.
So this is literally deadly serious. And by the way, dicamba-resistant pigweed, which is the most invasive weed in soybeans that they're worried about, dicamba-resistant pigweed has been discovered in Tennessee and Arkansas, and these seeds have only been around for 2 years. So, what were you going to ask?
I just feel like this is a civil issue. I mean, this neighbor has insurance, you see the insurance, you're going to be negligent, and it's not a problem to the government for?
Let's talk about that during question and answer. Keep that, we'll talk about that first, okay? Because that's a huge discussion to have. Just so you don't think I'm some type of organoapologist or anything, I'm going to give you a non-government situation here. This is, again, in Oregon, in Sherman County. There's a case in Azure Farms, which is an organic producer. They are surrounded by conventional wheat producers, not organic or anything, but just conventional. The organic farm over the last 10 years has had a huge invasive weed problem. We're talking thistles, bindweed, nothing that has any useful content. It chokes out and contaminates the wheat crops in the surrounding properties. The neighbors for the last 10 years have been trying to deal one-on-one with Azure Farms and say, hey, please control your weeds. This is a problem for us. Specifically the spread of the seeds onto their property. It also affects livestock. This particular Canadian thistle can actually kill cattle. Azure Farms would deal with it, then not. So finally, the surrounding neighbors had to go to the county and say, hey, this is at such a level now where we need you to step in. We've tried for 10 years, now it's your turn. So the county asks Azure Farms for a weed control plan with defined as control as little or no seed spread. The response from Azure Farms ownership was that their only weed control plan was prayer. That if God wanted weeds there, then the weeds were going to be there, and if God didn't want the weeds there, they would go away. So they're going to pray the weeds away. The county managed not to send a snarky reply, which I was actually kind of proud of them for. They said that plan's not acceptable, and to please present a real one within 30 days, or we're going to have to quarantine your property. And by quarantine, that means we'll cut it off. It's about 1,000 acres. We'll cut off your access to it, except for critical needs, and we will go in and do everything that we can to quickly get rid of these weeds, which would mean spraying, most likely, which would make them lose their organic farm status. They wouldn't be able to sell organic produce for at least 3 years. Instead of Azure Farms saying, oh, yeah, we're being jerks, sorry, we want to be good neighbors, instead of doing that, they went to social media and started an all-out hit piece on their neighbors and on the county, claiming that they were the ones being persecuted for their beliefs. Like, no, you're being a jerk about your weeds, you're not being persecuted. The neighbors and the county actually, stood up to it. They're like, they're telling you not all of the story, here's what it is. At a huge meeting for the county to review whether or not this property was going to be quarantined, there were all but 17 residents of this district, of this county, were present at this meeting because they were so upset about what Azure had done. Long story short, they submitted a plan that is still under review by the county, that is still being reviewed by their neighbors to make sure that it will take care of the actual problem. And they've backed off on the whole pray the weeds away thing. So that's good. It unfortunately went to the force of the government to get it there, though. So, wrapping it all up with property issues, what's going on? There are both sides, the government side and this one example of the organic farmer side, that they all appeal to the same things. It's all for the greater good. The government is just trying to help you. The organic farmers that are violating their neighbors' property rights, they're just trying to grow happy, traditional food. Whereas on the other side, it's all about science. They're both appealing to the health of the general population that they claim to serve. And one, Azure Farms, is appealing to God, and the other side is appealing to the government, which could be its own separate religion. Both ignore completely property rights in that. They ignore what they're doing to their neighbors. They ignore what they're doing to the markets that their neighbors are trying to create. And the government lets them get away with it for the most part. That's what we're talking about here. I just, one last thing to end. I saw today, perfect example of the government telling people what they can and can't do. The FDA has told a granola company, Neshoba Brook Bakery, to remove love from its ingredient list, as there is no common or usual name for such an ingredient on file. The FDA, EPA, and USDA thus prove that they have no love for you.